This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Mateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. American and Chinese officials get candid, raising complaints in a call 2 weeks ahead of the Crunch-Trump-Xi summit, with Washington warning Beijing's new rules have a chilling effect on supply chains. Now, the tech rift widens. The U.S. Telecoms Agency advances a proposal that could bar labs in China from testing electronics, from smartphones to laptops made for the American market, sparking backlash from Beijing. Now, a legal deadline looms over President Trump's war on Iran, but the White House says last month's ceasefire paused the clock, sparing it from having to seek immediate congressional approval. And Japan's Prime Minister heads first to Vietnam, then Australia, with Indo-Pacific security, critical minerals and energy cooperation high on the agenda. And South Korean exports jump in April, with global AI-related demand driving tech exports for the country. Also ahead, a new name for a broader workforce. South Korea marks Labor Day, replacing Workers' Day. Thousands rallying in Seoul as President Lee Jae-myung vows zero compromise on workplace safety. Plus, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong warns of tougher times ahead in his May Day rally speech, but says new and better jobs will be created as the economy transforms. Now, top U.S. and China trade officials have held candid talks ahead of President Donald Trump's planned trip to Beijing in about 2 weeks. A U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent held a video call with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. Washington said that they discussed a possible board of trade to manage economic ties and streamline trade in non-sensitive goods. Beijing said that the call was focused on issues of mutual concern and expanding pragmatic cooperation. Both sides have called the discussion constructive, but also raised concerns with each other's trade policies. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned about the impact of China's regulations after Beijing recently rolled out a legal framework that could penalize foreign firms shifting sourcing of critical minerals and other goods away from China. A Chinese state media said that Vice Premier He voiced, quote, solemn concern over what he described as restrictive trade measures against China. But Mr. He added that both sides agreed to promote healthy, stable development of bilateral trade relations. Now, separately, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a call with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. During that call, Mr. Wang said that Beijing and Washington should prepare for what he called important high-level exchanges ahead of an expected summit between the leaders from both nations. But the Chinese foreign minister also warned that Taiwan remains the biggest risk point in the relationship. Mr. Wang told Mr. Rubio that the issue concerns, quote, China's core interests and urged the U.S. to keep its promises and make the right choices. Now, the readout from the Chinese Foreign Ministry added that Mr. Rubio said that ties between the two countries remain the most important bilateral relationship in the world, and head of state diplomacy is at the core of those relations. The high-level talks come as relations between U.S. and China appear to be relatively stable, but tensions still persist with U.S. tariffs and sanctions on major Chinese tech firms, a key sticking point. China has criticized a proposal by a U.S. regulator that would bar its laboratories from testing electronic devices for use in the United States, saying that it undermines bilateral trade relations. Well, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, voted to advance a proposal which, if approved, would affect a wide range of products, including smartphones, cameras, and computers. The agency estimates that around 75% of devices certified for the U.S. market are tested in recognized labs in China. Now, the FCC said that the proposal is aimed at prioritizing national security. Now, China's Commerce Ministry said that the restrictions would seriously damage the international economic and trade order and warned that it would take countermeasures if the proposal is implemented. The ministry accused the FCC of repeatedly introducing restrictive measures against Chinese companies and products, adding that such actions undermine the hard-won stability in bilateral economic and trade relations. Now, in a separate vote, the FCC also advanced a proposal to bar China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom from operating data centers in the U.S. The companies were previously barred from operating in the U.S. FCC Chair Brendan Carr said that the regulator is acting to secure U.S. networks from, quote, bad actors. The proposed actions build on earlier U.S. restrictions targeting Chinese technology firms and equipment. Now, Panama says that it is maintaining constructive relations with China, even as it finds itself caught between Beijing and Washington in a broader struggle for influence. President José Raúl Mulino again defended his country's takeover of Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison's port contracts, which came amid mounting U.S. pressure to curb Chinese influence over the crucial waterway. He added that the dispute will soon be heard by international arbitration courts.
Nosotros estamos en una forma como una marea que nos lleva producto de un problema de dos grandes, Estados Unidos con China. Coincide con el tema de los puertos, que tampoco es una decisión del gobierno. El gobierno actuó porque se acabó el contrato y no podemos seguir manteniendo una actividad de semejante importancia y riesgo en el ámbito marítimo sin un contrato.
In January, Panama invalidated contracts held by Panama Ports Company CK Hutchison's local unit to run its Balboa and Cristobal terminals on both sides of the Panama Canal. The move was followed by reports of retaliatory detentions and inspections of Panama-flagged vessels in China, prompting the U.S. express solidarity with Panama this week, with top officials stressing that the sovereignty of the Western Hemisphere is non-negotiable. Now, China, in its response, said that it is Washington who's behind the politicizing and securitizing of the matter. Well, later this hour, we're going to be speaking with Ben Blend, director of the Asia-Pacific program at Chatham House, and for some insights on varying points of friction between Washington and Beijing ahead of the Trump-Xi summit. A legal deadline that could force the U.S. to halt its military operations against Iran is fast approaching. President Donald Trump has until midnight to secure congressional approval or stop the war. But the administration argues that the timeline no longer applies, saying that last month's ceasefire effectively paused the clock. Now, at the center of the dispute is the 1973 War Powers Resolution. The law allows the president 60 days to conduct military action. After that, the president must stop, seek approval, or request a 30-day extension from Congress. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told senators the ceasefire paused that 60-day clock. But Democrats rejected that argument, saying that the law makes no such allowance. But a senior official says the U.S.-Iran ceasefire that began in early April effectively terminated hostilities for legal purposes. Well, there has been no exchange of fire between U.S. and Iranian forces for weeks now. But on the ground, signs of strain are still visible. Iranian media reports say that Tehran briefly activated air defenses late yesterday to counter drones and small aircraft. And that comes after Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, vowed to protect its nuclear and missile programs yesterday. Now, Tehran warns that any renewed attack by Washington would trigger a, quote, long and painful response. At the same time, control of the Strait of Hormuz remains a major point of tension. The U.S. blockade and Iran's grip on the key waterway continuing to raise economic and security stakes. Japan has started the release of additional oil from its reserves, with 20 days' worth being freed up starting from today. It's the second time the country is dipping into its national stockpile since the start of the war in Iran. Well, the government says that the latest release was to ensure a stable supply of oil. Tokyo started tapping into its reserves in March after the International Energy Agency announced that members will be conducting a record 400 million barrel coordinated release. Before today's issue, Japan has released a total of about 50 days' worth of oil from its state and private stockpiles. Reports say that reserves have dipped by about a month's worth in just a little more than a month. The decline has raised some concerns about the level of reserves. government officials have been assuring that the country has enough to last into the next year. Japan's stockpiles are among the world's largest, but it typically obtains about 90% of its crude from the Gulf. Now, the energy shock from the war in Iran is set to be high on the agenda during Prime Minister Takaichi's visits to Vietnam and Australia, where she'll be embarking on a 5-day trip today to seek a deeper economic and security ties to counter challenges, including an increasingly assertive China. CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida has the details.
In Vietnam, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi aims to advance both sides' comprehensive strategic partnership in areas such as energy and critical minerals. Vietnam is Japan's second biggest supplier of rare earth minerals after China. Japan also wants to enhance cooperation in strategic fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and space. She will meet To Lam, Vietnam's president and leader of its ruling Communist Party, and Prime Minister Lee Man-hung on Saturday. Ms. Takaichi will also deliver a foreign policy speech in Hanoi on a vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's a concept introduced by the late leader Shinzo Abe to promote regional stability through rule of law and free trade. She plans to speak about how this can evolve to bolster supply chains and energy security, according to the Japanese government. In Australia, Ms. Takaichi will seek to take both countries' special strategic partnership to greater heights when she meets Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Monday. Japan regards Australia as a quasi-ally and a key partner in maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific. Australia this month finalized a $7 billion deal to purchase 3 Mogami-class frigates from Japan. This marks the largest defense sales contract so far for Tokyo, which recently eased long-standing restrictions on arms exports, a move that drew criticism from China. Besides defense, economic security and energy are again likely to be key areas of focus on the back of the Middle East crisis. Japan imports 70% of its coal from Australia. Both countries mark the 50th anniversary of the signing of their basic treaty of friendship and cooperation this year. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, the Japanese yen surging against the dollar today after another suspected intervention by officials to steady the currency since last night. Plus, Japanese authorities also reportedly pondering stepping into oil markets. We'll look at the link between energy prices and the weakness of the yen. Hello again. Glad you're spending your Friday evening with us in East Asia tonight. Well, you're just in time for some business news with Olivia Marzuki. And today we're talking about South Korea. I mean, we know it as a bellwether for global trade. So walk us through, what about its April trade figures? I mean, what is it saying about the developed world?
Well, I'll tell you, we know that, yes, Korea is Asia's 4th largest economy, and it is a bellwether. It's registering double-digit growth for both exports and imports, suggesting that there's structural trends driving it rather than the current energy crisis. So South Korea's export engine continues to charge ahead with robust semiconductor demand continuing to anchor growth in April. Shipments jumped 48% on year last month, despite mounting risks from higher energy prices linked to the war on Iran. Imports increased 16.7%, resulting in a trade surplus of $23.8 billion. Computer-related exports soared more than 50-fold, driven by the AI boom, which continued to boost demand for solid-state drives, or SSDs. Semiconductor exports also saw stellar performance, jumping 173% on year, with rising contract prices for memory chips. Huawei looks set to capture a larger share of China's AI chip market this year, as its sales jumped. The Chinese tech firm has been expanding its chip-making capabilities rapidly as NVIDIA's products continue to face regulatory barriers amid U.S.-China tech rivalry. Well, Huawei is projecting revenues to reach $12 billion this year based on orders received, a leap from 60% from last year. Many of the orders are for the Ascend processor 950PR. These are designed for running large language models used in AI products. Sales are boosted by Beijing's official support for domestic producers. Huawei outsources the making of its AI chips to SMIC, China's leading chip maker. Morgan Stanley estimates the country's chip market will reach $67 billion by 2030. About 86% of the market will be filled by Chinese firms, and the investment bank estimates domestic suppliers contribute some $21 billion in sales for the country. Toyota Motor is eyeing emerging markets to drive their growth. The world's biggest car maker is planning to build 3 assembly plants in Maharashtra in India. And this will triple production capacity in the country to 1 million units by 2030s. The Japanese firm is looking at investing a total of $1.9 billion. The plan comes as Toyota Motor is expected to report a 4th straight year-on-year drop in quarterly operating profit next week, as rising costs and U.S. tariffs offset strong demand, especially for hybrid vehicles. The automaker is forecast a post-operating profit of more than $5 billion for the Jan to March quarter, down 27% from a year earlier. Well, that would bring Toyota's full-year operating profit to a 3-year low of about $25.4 billion. It underscores mounting pressure on the Japanese automaker despite strong global sales and production. Analysts say that higher wages, U.S. tariffs, and rising raw material costs linked to the Middle East conflict are likely to weigh on results. And the Japanese yen now trading around 156.5 level to the greenback after authorities reportedly stepped in again today to prop up the embattled currency from a near 2-year low. And that's just after another suspected intervention last night when the yen breached the 160 mark. The move strengthened the currency by about 3% to about 155.5 in an effort analysts say cost more than $34 billion. The last interventions were back in 2024 when the yen hit a 38-year low. In July, Japanese authorities pumped in close to $37 billion to help the yen pull from as low as 161.76 to 157.3. And between the end of April and start of May 2 years ago, officials spent a record $62 billion to steady the yen after again it breached the 160 mark. The yen's prolonged weakness partly reflecting the central bank's slow normalization of its interest rate policy from near zero. The Bank of Japan held the benchmark rate steady at 0.75% earlier this week, given the uncertainty over the situation in the Middle East. Forex traders on edge, with the country's top currency diplomat saying that speculation remain rife, a remark seen as a warning that officials are ready to step in again. One analyst explains the implications of the yen's moves on the broader market amid the double whammy of a weakening U.S. dollar and rising energy prices.
It's one of those risks that we're monitoring very closely. Obviously, the impact of Iran war on financial markets, that means rates may be higher for longer. But we don't think it's an earnings killer per se, as long as it's not extended in duration. As it relates to currency moves, we are watching that very carefully as it relates to interest rates. So right now, with a weakening dollar, it does have some pressure on commodity prices. But at the same time, it helps U.S. exports. So overall, as long as the earnings engine continues and the Iran war does not get too extended, we still maintain a bullish posture. It was a very strong month for April. We think it's a earnings-driven market. As you mentioned earlier, earnings are doing the heavy lifting for the market. So we have that going well for the market. We have a growing economy that's albeit moderate, still growing. And the secular AI theme is real. So this is a market we think that can grind higher on earnings, even if the Fed stays patient because of the Iran war.
Well, Japanese authorities are also reportedly considering stepping into the oil futures market to relieve pressure on the currency. That's as policymakers see the speculative surges in US dollar denominated energy prices as a key driver of the yen weakness against the dollar. Demand for oil will tend to result in a strengthening of the greenback. So the two crude futures are adding steam as we speak now. Brent is hovering at $111 a barrel, WTI $105.60. They're pairing gains from a nearly 4-year high yesterday. At one point, Brent traded more than $126 per barrel. Since the start of the war on Iran, oil prices have jumped more than 50% due to the blockade at the Strait of Hormuz and also attacks on energy infrastructure in the Middle East. The International Monetary Fund has warned that the closure of the strait could cause an energy crisis on an unprecedented scale. The head of the International Energy Agency also saying earlier this month that the current energy crisis is worse than the 1973, 1979, and 2022 crises combined. CNA's Roland Lim takes a look at the past crises.
Now let's rewind the clock back to 1973, which many consider the first oil shock since the Second World War. Now, shortly after Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel in October. The Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, led by Saudi Arabia, announced an oil embargo on countries that supported Israel. By the time the embargo was lifted in March of 1974, oil prices had spiked by 300% to around $12 a barrel. Adjusted for today's prices, that's around $70 a barrel. 5 years later, the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War sparked the second oil shock. Production in both countries plummeted, affecting global output by around 4%. Now, oil prices, however, more than doubled to around $40 a barrel. In today's prices, over $150. In the 1980s, more refineries around the world came online, boosting production outside of the Middle East, causing oil prices to decline, but not below pre-1973 levels. Now, oil then spiked in 1990 following Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, with prices reaching around $100 in today's value. Markets, however, quickly regained confidence over the success of a US-led coalition intervention. At the turn of the millennium was another oil shock in the opposite direction, with prices dropping to pre-1973 levels in the last quarter of 1998. Global demand for oil had declined and trouble was brewing within OPEC. Now, Venezuela had a goal of doubling its output, and Saudi Arabia, not wanting to lose out, pushed other members to increase production by a tenth, fueling a supply glut. Over the last 2 decades, oil has buoyed between two extremes. Rapid economic growth in India and China helped drive oil prices to an all-time high of over $200 a barrel just before the global financial crisis. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, as global travel came to a halt, U.S. oil prices actually turned negative on the 20th of April 2020, meaning instead of paying for oil, traders were paid to take delivery. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 caused another spike as the West imposed sanctions on Moscow, which at that time supplied a tenth of global oil demand.
And that rounds out the business news for the week. It's back to you, Oteli.
Thanks so much for that, Olivia. Right, on that note, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, pressure points remain between Washington and Beijing, from trade and tech to energy and security, ahead of an expected Trump-Xi summit this month. How will they be addressing those concerns? Well, an expert will be joining us after the break to unpack what's at stake. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. A legal deadline looms over U.S. President Donald Trump's Iran campaign, but But the administration says it doesn't apply, as officials argue that last month's ceasefire paused the 60-day clock. Also, China hits out at a U.S. regulator's proposal to block Chinese labs from testing electronics for the American market. The move could impact devices like smartphones and cameras. Beijing warns of countermeasures if the plan goes ahead. Plus, top U.S. and Chinese economic officials hold candid talks ahead of a key Trump-Xi summit later this month. And Washington warns that Beijing's new rules could disrupt global supply chains, while China raises concerns over what it calls restrictive trade measures by the U.S. Both sides trading concerns, but signaling openness to continued dialogue. And to help unpack those talks and key pressure points between Washington and Beijing, let's bring in Ben Bland, Director of the Asia-Pacific Program at Chatham House. Well, thanks, Ben, for joining us this evening. So let's just start with the tone of that call. Both sides, calling these talks candid, comprehensive, but behind all that diplomatic lingo, Ben, what does that actually tell us about the state of U.S.-China ties right now?
I think the positive messages from both sides tell us that Beijing and Washington are looking to further stabilize the relationship going forward. There's currently a trade truce in place since October last year. And it's clear that the task set by both Xi Jinping in Beijing and Donald Trump in Washington to their officials is to find more positive ground to move the relationship forward. So I think that's what these calls resemble, is the footwork between the different camps of trying to work out some positive landing spaces at a time when both governments are under a lot of pressure for different reasons.
But we've got Secretary Bessent, he jumped on X immediately after that call to talk about Beijing's chilling extraterritorial regulations. I mean, when you read something like that, is this Washington basically trying to build leverage ahead of the Trump-Xi summit?
I think that's right. There is some concern about these new regulations which have come out in China, which would allow China to take action against companies or individuals that are seeking to diversify their supply chain risk away from China. So there's, I think, some genuine concern there. But this is part of the sort of tit for tat public relations combat before the meeting. So it's partly about generating leverage. It's partly about domestic signaling. But I think overall it's clear that both sides are trying to find positive ground to move the relationship forward. And it seems that one thing Donald Trump wants to have, if he can, is a more positive relationship with Xi Jinping. I think that's been clear over time. But it's quite hard to find the stable ground in the relationship, given these two countries are competing on so many fronts and below the level of the leadership, at the level of Congress in the US, at the level of US companies, and on the Chinese side too. There are a lot of heads butting together. So I think it's going to be difficult for the two leaders to find this more stable ground. But that's clearly, the negotiation that's underfoot before President Trump's likely visit to Beijing later this month.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know what you think, because how much of this dispute is still about trade, in the traditional sense, and how much of it, is about all the other stuff like control over tech, critical minerals, strategic influence, that sort of thing?
Trade has clearly been one of the drivers of the intensifying US-China competition, but I also think it's just one of the many factors at play, and it's also one of the arenas of competition, if you like. I think really at its heart, this is about two superpowers butting heads, the US being the established superpower and China being the rising superpower, and a deep sense of discomfort in the US with China's rise and what that means. And also in China, a great deal of nervousness and paranoia about the US potentially being able to choke off or restrict China's own rise. So I think at the essence, it's a sort of competition of two superpowers. Then we see the competition unfolding in lots of different arenas, and some of those arenas then become accelerants for further tensions. But also, trade offers a potential landing point for the relationship. We know that after Donald Trump's initial Liberation Day tariffs, there was a truce agreed between China and the US in October last year, which is holding up to now. So we'll have to see if that can continue. So I think there's going to be lots of trade issues. There's potential for some trade agreements, but I just don't think we're going to see a permanent stabilization of this relationship in May or anytime soon. I think the more fundamental drivers of tensions between the US and China, which are coming from both sides, if we're honest, are likely to endure through this Donald Trump presidency and into future leaderships, both on the US and the Chinese side.
And of course, the summit itself has been shaped by events that goes far beyond trade. I mean, the current conflict in the Middle East, how has that changed the leverage and even the tone of US-China diplomacy heading into this summit?
Well, I think for the United States, it gives them a much bigger and more acute problem to be dealing with first and foremost, which is why we saw the first arranged date for this summit postponed, because the US president and his administration were obviously really busy trying to find a resolution to the war that they started in Iran and the Gulf. So I think that is one complicating factor for the US. Obviously for China, like Singapore and many other Asian states, it's importing a huge amount of its energy, fertilizer and other key resources through the Straits of Hormuz. So the blockade there from the US and the restrictions on shipping from the Iranian military, that's all had a really serious impact on the Chinese economy in the short term. And if this continues for the medium term, will potentially be quite damaging. So there's a big concern there from China about the impact of this. And I think then there's a broader question of how both superpowers are perceived in the rest of the world. And in some ways, this war has been a win for China, because while the US appears to be the destabilizing economic force and geopolitical force, China appears relatively reliable in some senses by comparison, even though it has many of its own challenges in terms of its external relations.
Well, many thanks, Ben, for helping us unpack the stakes ahead of that Trump Xi summit. Ben Bland, Director of the Asia-Pacific Program at Chatham House. Well, in other news, South Korea has reaffirmed its commitment to peaceful coexistence in the Korean Peninsula, underscoring a renewed push toward denuclearization. Seoul's top envoy emphasized the importance of building trust with Pyongyang as a foundation for progress at a United Nations Security Council meeting. Ambassador Cha Ji-hoon outlined a step-by-step approach to negotiations, one that would begin with halting Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs before moving toward their complete dismantlement. Now, he called on the international community to work under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, stressing that North Korea should not gain the status of a nuclear weapon state. Meanwhile, Pyongyang has issued a sharp rebuke to the UN Security Council meeting. North Korea's ambassador to the UN, Kim Song, dismissed the session and criticized a recently disbanded UN expert panel that had been tasked with monitoring sanctions enforcement. Now, he described the group as a politically motivated conspiracy, claiming its dissolution reflected what he called the fair judgment of history. Japan's nuclear energy comeback is gathering pace years after the Fukushima nuclear disaster forced the shutdown of its entire reactor fleet. Now, with energy security in focus and nuclear seen as a stable, low-carbon source, reactors are slowly coming back online. Well, in Niigata Prefecture, for instance, the Kashiwazaki-Kariwa nuclear plant, once idle for more than a decade, is now back in operation. Its Unit 6 reactor has reached full commercial supply, delivering power to the Tokyo metropolitan area for the first time since 2011. Operator TEPCO says that the restart follows years of safety upgrades under some of the world's strictest post-Fukushima standards. Our senior correspondent Micha Ishida reports from inside the plant in Niigata.
Only Unit 6 of the Kashiwazaki-Kariwa nuclear power station is online. I'm on the top floor of Unit 6, and this is where you can witness fuel rods being moved. Now, there are also measures taken to prevent hydrogen explosion.
Well, the Middle East crisis has disrupted the global oil supply pipeline. Japan relies on the region for nearly all of its crude oil, but the country is aiming to reduce its reliance on imported fossil fuel. Well, nuclear power reportedly accounts for about 8.5% of Japan's energy mix as of 2023, down from more than 25% at its peak in 2010, before the Fukushima accident. Japan is aiming to raise it back to 20% by 2040. Coming up in East Asia tonight, from Seoul to Taipei and Singapore, May Day brings rallies, reforms and renewed pledges. We take a look at what's driving change for workers across the region. South Korean workers take to the streets marking May Day under a new name in a shift that reflects a broader and more inclusive view of the country's workforce. Thousands of people from workers' groups gathered in Seoul to commemorate Labor Day. The holiday was previously known as Workers' Day, a term adopted under a past anti-communist government which was wary of the word labor. While the old name is perceived as being too narrow to describe those in standard employment under the Labor Standards Act, the new name, Labor Day, is meant to recognize a wider range of people, including freelancers, delivery workers, and others falling outside of traditional contracts. And to mark the change, President Lee Jae-myung has pledged for unwavering commitment to workplace safety, emphasizing that welfare and business growth are mutually dependent. He adds that safeguarding workers is the most basic responsibility of any nation and business. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, workers are also marking new May Day reforms, with teachers celebrating the holiday officially for the first time. A new law has granted educators to observe the national holiday, as unions also push for further changes, including better job security, fairer pay, and a greater voice in university governance. And here in Singapore, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong promises that no Singaporean will be left behind amid waves of disruptions from the Middle East conflict and the rise of artificial intelligence. In his May Day rally speech that at times became emotional, he pledges to protect every worker, provide new and better jobs, and more support if conditions worsen. He says that solidarity and collective action, especially with the labour movement, is how the country has weathered storms in the past. And now, Singapore is better prepared and in a much stronger position to do so.
Brothers and sisters, this promise lies at the heart of who we are. So whether it is an energy crisis or the AI revolution, we will look after our own. No Singaporean will be left behind.
Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says that Singaporeans must brace themselves for what he calls a more severe storm ahead that could last for months from the ongoing Middle East conflict. But he says the country is better prepared and in a stronger position to face the challenges than before. Claudia Lim with more.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz disrupting supply chains with no end in sight. Airlines cutting flights amid fuel shortages, factories reporting delays, and essential goods like fertilizer and food hit, and shortages of some items to come. In his May Day rally speech, the Singapore Prime Minister says it's a stark reminder of the oil shocks in the 1970s, a time of high unemployment and high inflation, the worst of both worlds.
The International Energy Agency, in fact, warns that the current crisis could be even more severe than what the world experienced in the 70s. So we must brace ourselves and be prepared for a more difficult period ahead. And I want to be upfront with all of you so that we are mentally prepared. But amidst these realities, we can also look ahead with quiet confidence. We do not face this crisis from a position of weakness. Singapore is better prepared and in a much stronger position today.
Despite having no oil or natural gas, he says Singapore made hard choices early to strengthen its energy resilience. For instance, it built Jurong Island to develop the country's refining and petrochemical industries. Today, Singapore is a key node in global energy flows. In the meantime, he's urging firms to do their part to ease the burden on Singaporeans. This comes as the government has rolled out support for households, workers and businesses.
The government has moved quickly to put in place an initial response to the crisis. But we expect the situation to become more challenging over the course of this year. And if that happens, we will do more to help. Because in times like this, Singaporeans can count on one thing: your government will act. We will do so decisively, and we will stand with you, with every Singaporean, every step of the way.
New and better jobs, a promise from the Prime Minister as AI transforms the economy. And it also came with a pledge to protect every worker, as well as a call for Singaporeans to do their part by learning and using the technology. Nicholas Ng has more.
Drafting emails, summarizing reports, and even writing code are tasks that AI tools like ChatGPT can do. But the next phase of the technology is creating AI agents that don't need humans to intervene.
The impact will be massive. AI will not just improve productivity, it will disrupt and reshape entire industries. Singapore must ready ourselves to succeed in this new environment. And that's why we've set up the National AI Council to coordinate our national efforts. Our goal is clear: to build deep AI capabilities, to drive adoption across our economy, and to make Singapore a hub for AI innovation. But ultimately, our key objective is to ensure that AI benefits every worker with better jobs and better opportunities.
Singapore's AI strategy is already bearing fruit. Global firms have chosen the country to lay roots, like Google, basing their first Southeast Asia research lab here. They are joined by an increasing number of fast-growing startups in the sector. Besides supporting firms in using the tech, much focus has also been in preparing workers for the transition.
AI is far more powerful than spreadsheets, so the impact on our workplaces will be much greater. And that's why I cannot promise that there will be no disruption. Jobs will change. Some will disappear. And the pace of change will be faster than anything we have seen before. But this I can promise you: as our economy transforms, we will create new and better jobs. We may not be able to protect every job, but we will protect every worker. Because in Singapore, every worker matters. Bringing about such inclusive growth, that does not happen by itself, and we will not leave it to chance or to the market entirely. Instead, we will take deliberate steps to ensure that the benefits of AI are shared by all.
Among the steps to do that is a new agency, the Skills and Workforce Development Agency, or SWDA, which will bring skills training and job matching closer together.
The government will provide the tools, the pathways, and the support. But we also need Singaporeans to step forward. Do not let anxiety or uncertainty hold you back from learning and using AI. AI is here to stay. So embrace it, learn it, use it, and master it. Companies that do so will stay competitive. Workers who build AI skills will have better opportunities and prospects.
To help Singaporeans pick up these skills, those signing up for some Skills Future courses can get premium AI tools for free for 6 months.
Wrapping his speech, Prime Minister Wong stressed that amid conflict, disruption and technological change, Singapore remains a nation that does not give up and does not abandon one another. The PM became emotional when he read an account from a passenger from one of the repatriation flights for Singaporeans stranded in the Middle East.
As the plane lifted off the runway, applause broke out. Then voices slowly rose across the cabin. Someone began singing Majulah Singapura. Others joined. It was one of those moments when you realize that home is not simply a place on a map. It is something deeper, a shared identity, a sense of belonging, and the knowledge that when things go wrong, your country will come for you.
Ultimately, Mr. Wong says that Singapore's unique tripartism is how the country overcame every wave of disruption, a system that is built on trust and solidarity.
We develop our own innovative solutions, practical, effective, and suited to our needs. So in Singapore, it's not welfare, it is workfare. It's not a minimum wage, but progressive wages. And it's not unemployment insurance, but it's job seeker support. And this is the Singapore way. We don't just talk, we act. We don't just plan, we deliver results, and together we take Singapore forward.
And that wraps up this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can find us on all our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Have a great Friday and a great weekend. See you.